Bold Leadership Series. This is the fourth and final webinar that we have today. And this is going to be a fantastic one, I think, for the group. It's a head start on housing for America's families today. Before we get started into the content, I want to just do a couple of introductions and a little bit about why we even are doing the Bold Leadership Series. First, for those of you, if this is your first time meeting me, welcome, hello. I'm Christina Ellis. I am the manager of the Academy at NHSA. And prior to that, I was in a Head Start, Early Head Start program in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 12 years called CAP Tulsa, who actually had a housing program there, Ruthie. So I'm excited to hear more about the one in Connecticut. And so why did we do the Bold Leadership Series? Whenever at NHSA we were talking about the field, we spent a lot of time talking about staff, teaching staff, about children and families who are absolutely priority. But then we also have to reflect on ourselves as leaders and making sure that we are filling our own cup, and that while we are sort of looking down in this space of the day-to-day and the pandemic, that we can kind of look up every now and then and be bold in our leadership. And so we've had 3 other webinars in this series. The first one was preventing burnout with bold leadership, which was a great first topic to just sort of recognize that there is burnout also in our leadership. And then we went on to thinking boldly with partnerships with Paula Margraf. And then if you were with us last week, Ray McNulty talked about leading in challenging times. And today we're going to be talking about another bold initiative, and that is a Head Start on housing for America's families, which I am going to take no more of her time and turn it over to Ruthie White for the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christina. It's been a pleasure to work with you and Dr. B on this. I also want to thank Bob Beeson. He's so aggressive in his approach to making sure that Head Start agencies have what they need, whether that means lobbying or doing seminars like this and seeking out people with a broad perspective. So it's really my honor to be here. The program that we're going to talk about today, it's interesting that you mentioned, Christina, that you had a similar program like this where you were running a Head Start agency. I set up a little booth at the National Head Start Association event in Baltimore, and I would say of the folks that visited that booth to learn about this program, about 30% of those agencies did have existing partnerships with their either public housing authority or some other housing entity in their community. And so what was really beautiful about Connecticut was how quickly they were able to get this up and running because of the leadership and because of the amazing folks like Elena and Mikhail. But what our agency really wants to do is make sure that if it can happen in Connecticut or Oklahoma or Cleveland or Atlanta, it should be able to happen anywhere. And so that's really what we want to talk about today. But my goodness, what an amazing case study Connecticut offers. So before I start talking about brass tacks, I really wanted to hand it over to the amazing professionals in the state of Connecticut that brought this to life. I'll also point out on this cover slide, we have the 2 commissioners. So the Department of Housing is run by Commissioner Sela Mesquero Bruno. We approached her about setting aside Section 8 housing choice vouchers and state rental assistance program vouchers for Head Start families. And she said yes immediately. It's not going to always happen that easily. It just happens that she's very broad-minded, brilliant person and jumped in immediately. Some folks aren't able or willing to do that. But here she is right in front of the LULAC Head Start, which Mikhail's the executive director of, talking to Commissioner Beth Bai. Many of you know her. They're sitting here talking about how great this program is and how they can't wait to bring it to the rest of the state. So, so the leadership in Connecticut is superb. So I'm going to hand it over to Elena to talk a little bit about her program. Then I'll turn it over to Mikhail. Then I will talk brass tacks. So this is our agenda for today. And then Christina will also field questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat throughout. But we'll take some time before my presentation is over to talk Q&A, and then we'll hand it back over to Christina for the closing remarks. So with that, I want to hand it over to the indomitable Miss Elena Trueworthy.
You're too kind, Ruthie, and thank you so much. And thank you to NHSA for this opportunity to be able to share what I think is some of the most exciting work that's happening in Connecticut right now. And I really want to give a lot of kudos and just thank you to Ruthie White. You as an individual leader yourself, and then a leader of this national organization, really pressing to push the boundaries and really think differently about how we're supporting all children and families, especially those in our Head Starts, is just so valuable. And we so thank you for coming to us, inviting us, and being so welcoming for this work to happen as well. And so, as Ruthie said, I'm Elena Trueworthy. I'm Connecticut's Head Start State Collaboration Office Director. And this work really resonates and really aligns with the work that collab directors can and should be doing within our states. And so this is really a all hands on deck with our partnerships, right? It's about partners coming together, really thinking about what are our strengths, what are the resources we can bring to the table, how do we align those resources, and how do we increase access, especially to housing for our Head Start and early Head Start families. And so this has been a pilot that we have been rolling out and implementing, and has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of great news around it. And so in the background here, you'll see Governor Lamont. This was a press conference that we held at Mikhail Center of LULAC a couple of months ago, announcing that we're taking this pilot statewide across the state of Connecticut to increase the access for our Head Start families to have stable, permanent, reliable housing, which we know is absolutely so critical and is really at the heart of what Head Start does, right? Really thinking about all of the family holistically. What are the needs and wants and desires and goals of both the children and families, and then bringing our partners together, setting the table and helping to make that happen. So I am now going to hand it over to Mikhail Verdbon, who is both from the Connecticut Head Start Association and from LULAC as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Ruthie. Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. This is exciting to be here and to talk about such important work and such a wonderful project. Before I introduce myself, I do just want to give recognition to Elena. She's an amazing collab officer director who really has allowed us to do lots of projects in Connecticut that we'll probably be hearing about for years to come. But this important project this year, working with the Connecticut Head Start Association as the co-chair, I am Mikhail Verdbon, and having kind of a dual role in both the co-chair of the association, but also an executive director of a Head Start program, it was a no-brainer to work with Elena and Ruthie and really come together to play our part on the ground, giving the voice of what programs would experience, how we could be involved, and really kind of, I love the idea of bold leadership, but reinvigorate my staff on such important work. I mean, lots of policy changes, lots of procedures and things that we were addressing to really put the pandemic first and foremost. So getting involved in this pilot and really looking at how we can support families for something that's so important as housing was something that our staff is very excited about. It was hard work, but of course, just hearing the stories from the families and hearing the impact to the families, it's definitely worth it. And so both my role as the executive director and the Connecticut Head Start Association co-chair, I'm able to inform Elena and Ruthie and really talk about the work on the ground. So that way, as we carry this pilot forward in Connecticut and as many states, we have that on the ground experience, some of the challenges, as well as some of the great outcomes that we were able to experience, and just hear the wonderful stories that continue to inspire us from our families of how this great project needs to continue, is so impactful, and we're going to see definitely changes as we continue to reimagine how we prepare our families and our children for not just school, but for a changing world. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ruthie. And again, I'm excited to be here and talk more about this amazing pilot.
And you guys saw that last picture of Mikhail in front of the microphone with all the local media. So look, really, it's been a privilege to be a part of this work, partly because I'm not exactly sure that my organization or my staff was prepared for the amount of on-the-ground work we would do initially. But I have to tell you, it's been magical because we've had the opportunity to meet not only the magnificent Head Start staff, but the families themselves. And so this is Megan and her husband at the roundtable that we had following that press event, and their story about how they were living in and out of motels, and some of that was paid for by the city and state funds, some federal funds. It's very expensive to have these families in and out of hotels. We'll never calculate the amount of emotional toll that we're levying upon every parent and child, but certainly it's imprudent in terms of how we expend our funds. So the Head Start staff, Janik from Mikhail's, I believe he's from your center, it is just the most amazing professional. So, you know, the Head Start workforce, they're aware of these families, but they don't have as immediate access to housing services. And so this had an impact on his career, but the story about how this wonderful woman, Megan, is now housed and able to cook for her own children in a kitchen. I mean, that was a big deal for her to just be able to cook healthy meals for her children in her own kitchen, which she had not had for, I believe, they've struggled for 5 years with no response from the 211 line or homeless services. So, and I want to say, we actually worked in tandem with 211 and the coordinated access folks. So that's been a really important partnership as well. But nonetheless, she suffered. So here she is telling her wonderful story. We have Monette Ferguson here in the upper left-hand corner of this slide, talking about how actually in Bridgeport, they were addressing housing needs for families at the Alliance for the Empowerment of Families, which that Head Start happens to be housed within a community action agency. So that in a lot of ways gives those agencies kind of a head a leg up on the competition. So Monette Ferguson, Dr. Monette Ferguson has really been an instrumental player here. Sitting next to her is Steve DeLilla, who is the Department of Housing staffer lead on this, and he's been wonderful. Do build those partnerships. And then I want to point out that in this other photo, these are the NCHCW staff on the ground. This is Betsy Cronin. I want to credit Betsy Cronin for this idea. So Betsy Cronin worked on what you all may have heard of over the years. HUD has a program for child welfare families called the Family Unification Program. I'm extremely religious and committed to that program. But Betsy had a point with this. She said, why would we wait until a family got entangled with child welfare to get them access to a voucher? And so it was really her idea to come in through the Head Start portal. Very honored to be a part of her professional career and to have her on our staff. And with her is our lead on the ground, that is Stacy Gerber, and she is actually a former DCF commissioner. So these two do everything from work with the state housing commissioner all the way to Betsy spent Sunday working with a realtor and going to apartments trying to find this housing unit for this family, and they will get housed, but there are on the ground staff. So that's an important component here. And what we would like to do is get that work kind of embedded in Head Start later with appropriate resources. But be that as it may, this is Betsy Cronin and Stacy Gerber. Okay. What is a Head Start on housing? It's simply the name for a cross-agency partnership. And the idea here is that we're going to use this partnership to leverage on-demand housing resources for Head Start families so that Head Start staff have access to those resources. But these are the collaborators, and it's worked very, very well. We have had willing folks in each of those agencies willing to put in the work. But what Head Start on Housing does is it capitalizes on you all. So Head Start is, been on the books for a very long time. I think President Johnson had it right when he started Head Start. And the interesting thing was, it was a bit of a coming full circle, because the press conference we put together to honor a Head Start on housing and to announce the expansion took place in New Haven, which was actually the original site for Head Start nationwide back, 50 years ago. So this is a great picture of the ACES Head Start staff that all showed up in their matching t-shirts. I said they look like a volleyball team or something. But my goodness, the amount of expertise embedded in Head Start, just represented here in ACES, but at any Head Start, is really, really wonderful. And so what we're simply trying to do is attach to that housing resource. And the reason we would approach this from a Head Start portal is because you're really multifaceted and agile. So the ability of a Head Start agency to really work like a community action agency and meet the parents where they are and build resources around that made it the perfect match for this programming. And it turns out I learned this while watching one of the Bold Leadership series. Thank you, Christina Ellis, in July. So in July, there was a series on partnership, and I watched that session. And the woman who did that session pointed out that it's actually required by law that Head Start establish these partnerships. And this is the particular section of the law. It's another screenshot. But of course, that law actually includes housing. So housing is specifically acknowledged. But the reality is, I think all of you know that, and I think you know you're beholden to this. But in some centers, you're going to have more access to housing resources than others. And that's what we want to help you build through a Head Start on housing. So how did this happen? Elena's here. She can help fill in some of the gaps. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but I want to assure you that first of all, if you already had this up and running in your community, we would love to know about it so that we can lift up your expertise and share that with the world. In the event that you're starting from scratch, we will help you walk through this process. Our organization will dispatch someone or help you in any way we can pull this together in your community. But first and foremost, tap your state collaboration office. And the other thing that I noted in the July series for the Bold Leadership on partnerships was that presenter really emphasized it's not just about bold leadership, it's about strategic leadership. And I want to say that really describes Elena's approach to this to a T. So she really wanted to make sure that the structure was in place before we move forward and get all of the various actors, which we'll discuss the roles in a minute, to understand and feel confident moving forward. And so that we really relied heavily on not just Elena, but Jennifer Jones and her office and Doreen Hem. So I want to say that their willingness to put some in-kind staff time into this mattered. And so I would urge all states to consider doing that. And again, we can help walk you through that. So start that collaboration and the discussion about partnerships very early on. Like we were able to have a Zoom call with Beth Bai of Early Childhood Office and Commissioner Bruno of the Housing Department right away. I think, a couple of meetings in and get their buy-in. The idea, again, this is straight from Elena, build this in phases. You might not be prepared to serve your entire state at once. So we can help you build a phase one. I would say we're wrapping up phase one of Connecticut and moving into phase two. That's what that expansion was about. Now, this was a conversation that it will take a whole nother webinar to describe how we did this, but you will have several Head Starts throughout your state. How do you select the ready to go Head Starts? And working together, we really put together a little bit of a survey to get at that. Elena, we're going to get back to this in a second. Oh, go ahead. Go for it.
If you want me to jump in here, yeah.
I do, yes.
Okay, great. So, right, remember that we're starting this pilot, our Head Start programs are still undergoing major transitions due to the pandemic, really trying to build up, to be strong and whatnot. And so that was part of our inquiry to them, right? Are you in a place where you're ready to be able to take on some of this new, more intensive work around housing? What does your enrollment look like currently with the families that you have categorized as experiencing homelessness right now? Like, what are those numbers? What are the situations that those families are in? And are the staff willing and open to getting trained, being supported, working with some potentially new partners as well? So that was all going into kind of the recipe of the ready to go sentiment. I'll also add that in Connecticut, and I'm sure in many of the states, there's a long history of partnerships with the housing partners in our state. And so we were really able to build upon those partnerships and to approach them, with some different ways of thinking, especially around the Department of Housing, and really thinking about how to, and this is really what the National Center brought, right? How to make those vouchers available specifically for Head Start families.
And Mikhail can fact check me on this, but nobody was like conscripted into the cause, right? So the idea was eventually this will be available statewide, but there are already Head Starts that are honestly doing quite a bit of this. In fact, some Head Start agencies are in community action agencies where they're managing housing. They have a housing portfolio or quite robust partnerships with housing developers in their community. So the thinking here was, let's not wait for everybody to get up to speed. Let's move. And we'll do that with the ready to go RTGs. And then, as other folks are trained or interested, we'll expand it further. And then the last thing I'll say about this bullet point is, if you are at a Head Start where you have very few homeless families, that's a great problem to have. But in the event that a homeless family emerges, you wouldn't have to pull this whole thing together. You would be able to call another agency, maybe in an adjacent jurisdiction, that does have a professional that knows how to do this, or the state collaborative office, and they would kind of deploy somebody to do it for you. So this is not a situation where every single Head Start has to have like a housing department or on-call housing expertise. It can be expanded without being burdensome to various Head Starts. So those are you start with your RTGs. The issue that we come up against as an agency that has a real serious track record of universalizing housing choice vouchers, I neglected to mention that the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare worked with Action Ohio, which is a youth-founded, youth-led organization, to universalize access to housing choice vouchers for youth aging out of foster care. If you haven't heard about it, email me or check out our website. It's called the Foster Youth Independence Initiative. We'd like to do that for families too. But even when we make vouchers available, we have people come to us and say, landlords won't take those vouchers. Landlords are not interested. The vouchers, the payment standards it's not high enough. So I too bellyache about that. But the reality is there is a method by which you can recruit landlords. And actually Connecticut created an entire landlord recruitment campaign. But we have found that often a broker or a real estate professional on the ground that can help your staff or our staff broker those deals matters. And we will talk, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that has to be a part of the equation. And then the other thing is you'll want to find some state or federal revenue, actually philanthropic would work as well, to cover the transitory costs. That's our word for first month's rent, security deposit, utility connection fees, all those one-offs that you have to pay to get into housing that we've all actually had to pay ourselves. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that landlord recruitment campaign in a minute. And then as you unfold all of this throughout your state, you're going to have to evaluate and adjust all along. That's just good project management. So we're doing that as well. And that involves feedback from families, from landlords, but also from your Head Start staff, because they are your eyes and ears on the ground. So this is just a little taste of the landlord recruitment campaign. So we're getting a lot of mileage out of this Head Start on Housing tagline. I just love it so much. But we're trying to make the case to landlords, like they can be a part of something very beautiful here. And I have some great stories about landlords that have wanted to do that because it's the morally right thing to do. But it's also the case that they get guaranteed rent. So these flyers were put together by O'Donnell, which is a company that was retained by the Office of Early Childhood, and they are magnificent. So they actually even set up a kind of a micro website where landlords can go and learn more. I don't know, maybe Elena, you could put the URL for that. If I could multitask better, I'd do it myself. But Elena is going to be kind enough to put that in the chat. Thank you. And it's an opportunity to get to landlords across the state and explain to them what the complement of services offered by a Head Start is, what the kind of families bring to the table, how cute the kids are, and a way to build the neighborhood fabric. And it's really, really magical. But I'll stop here and just tell a quick story. I was in Connecticut last week, and I had the pleasure of meeting one of these landlords who actually dropped their rent by $300 a month in order to meet the Section 8 rate. So this young man purchased a double. He and his wife and their 2 dogs are going to live in the first floor unit, and the second floor unit they're renting to a man and his 2-year-old child. And they are currently doubled up and in a very precarious situation because it's in a rooming house and there are a lot of random people coming in and out of there, and that's not good for child well-being. So so our staff was able to secure this unit, and both the realtor and our staff convinced this man how important this was, and he lowered his rent. But I got to meet him, and I met his younger brother too. So it turns out that this is just your average Connecticut guy who's trying to create a life for himself. He's a middle-class person, and he has 7 brothers. And when he bought this property, all the 8 boys all worked to get this property up to code and up to the, to be able to rent it and make a stream of income for him and his wife, in addition to working full-time employment. And he met this man and his child and got down on the floor and played with him and was completely sold. He's like, we will drop the rent $300 a month. This is going to be beautiful. And what's amazing is Melissa, the Head Start worker, came out, met, we all met, and I should have actually put that picture instead of the front of the house, but the front of the house is the last slide you'll see. But what an amazing American story that this middle-class gentleman is making it work for another middle-class gentleman who's trying to raise his son on his own. But they're in early Head Start, as you all know, because the child is 2. So the child's not in formal daycare. There's a daycare center across the street from this house. I mean, it is just the most magical story. So these landlords are out there. Yes, I think there's ways to extend your reach, but these people are out there and these stories can happen. And we think Head Start is the right place to, again, the right way to leverage a voucher. So what would this look like in terms of administration for a Head Start agency? It can look however you want it to look. But what we recommend is that for Head Starts that would have a higher percentage of families with housing challenges that could benefit from this, probably you should designate a staff person, probably not a full-time FTE. But again, if you're in a large metropolitan area and most of your families have housing problems, you might want to find a way to get the right amount of money in there to buy an FTE. But we think a person on staff that is trained as an early childhood housing outreach professional who, when families with housing challenges who could benefit from this are identified, that person compiles the paperwork. That person is sort of the gatekeeper for the applications, and we refer to that as ECHO. Probably every Head Start should have someone who's trained on what this phenomenon is, but we would offer like a certification that was an ECHO professional. Once established, their job, I'm going to show you a chart. If this is put into place in your community, they would work in tandem with and essentially bypass some of the coordinated entry hurdles, and well, reporting that all along. And then we would like to see this expand beyond Head Start into McKinney-Vento professionals whom I'm sure you all know are all, like many of your staff, required to work with families who are homeless or precariously housed, and in fact, some unaccompanied youth as well. Also, you know, hospital staff and folks of that in those roles. So this was our original chart. This is morphed a little bit, but this was the original concept, and I offer it because in places where you're already doing this, you could perhaps add a few components. But the original idea here was, in any community that was interested, we would step in as part of the equation and help put this into place. Your ECHO professionals, your resource folks at each of these different entities would be able to refer into a state office, and that state office would either work on the housing issue, or which means get you expedited access to a voucher, or on the flip side, if you have a family who isn't enrolled in Head Start but would benefit from Head Start, you could perhaps even do some of that, and maybe some self-sufficiency services, and open up that complement of services through Head Start. And then of course the outcomes here are stable housing, children enrolled in school or preschool, and hopefully the families are moving towards self-sufficiency. What we noticed in this Connecticut model is it's actually the case that there are a few families, not a ton, but there are a few families who are on the homeless services by name list who have been referred to ECHO. So they've been referred to the Head Start on Housing model, and we've been able to house those families. So it's actually beneficial for the coordinated entry folks too, because they're extremely overtaxed. One last thing about this, throughout this presentation, I've avoided offering references for research that just demonstrates the importance of housing to education and developmental milestones for children. We built this concept using that. So there's the McCarver Elementary School research, there's the family options study. So the idea that permanent housing for families is the right platform for all of the things I have under outcomes is something that the United States has known for years. But if you go to our website, we can provide you with those references as well, because we do fully believe in research. So again, the stories are magical. Our staff person, Stacy Gerber, has all of these committed to memory and loves to tell them on a regular basis. But you can imagine that if a family has been unable to meet their housing challenges for years, but still enrolls their child in Head Start and gets them there, Head Start being a voluntary program, the idea that they would be able to meet that housing challenge and move into their own apartment or their own home is something that it takes the families a minute to grasp. In fact, Fred, the gentleman who's secured this unit here, said we talked to him yesterday, and he said, I just cannot believe that this is happening. I cannot believe that we've struggled for so long and now we're getting housing. So it's just been really, really eye-opening to learn what families have been going through and what the workers have been trying to piece together on a regular basis to meet these challenges with very little resources at their disposal. The stories are just beautiful, and they're going to grow because the folks in Connecticut have decided to take this statewide. Okay, this is another mind-boggling chart, but I just have to throw it out there. If your community were to find, or your state were to find these kind of ready-to-go Head Starts, I think you could set this up very quickly. We'd be happy to do a few Zoom calls and whatever else you need, whatever else Elena suggests, to help get you guys ready to pull this together, but there's really no reason to wait. I want to offer to you again, about 30% of the Head Start folks that came to visit with me in Baltimore in May are already administering vouchers from their local public housing authority. So I think sometimes folks call their local public housing authority and they're told no, or they don't answer the phone. We can help you build a relationship with your public housing authority, because the reality is while they do have discretion, they also are, they do have to respond to community needs. So there are ways that you can encourage your housing authority, but generally, when we do sit down with housing leaders, they're very gracious and they are willing to do these things. So sometimes it's just getting your foot in the door, but once you do that, your ready to go Head Starts could actually be the gatekeepers on this and begin to make referrals until such a time as you could kind of get all the Head Starts up and ready to go. And again, I want to offer that not every Head Start needs to even have a staff person doing this. If they have very few homeless families, there is a way to also expand the reach of these ready to go Head Starts. I would like to see them be compensated, and I would like ECHO professionals to have a bump in salary to do this. But be that as it may, these folks are so savvy that what they're able to do is get the housing choice voucher packet ready, and the families are document ready before they're referred to the housing authority. So I want to say a quick word about prioritization. I don't really like to talk about it. Elena knows that because I want everybody served. But we didn't screen anybody out that was hard to house. Instead, what we said was, it doesn't make sense to refer a family to a Department of Housing or a local public housing authority if they're not document ready, right? Get that done first and then refer them, because if you refer a family who doesn't have their birth certificates and doesn't have their picture ID or their worker's ID, whatever, they're still going to wait for housing until those needs are met. So I really want to emphasize that the folks so the ECHO folks would know exactly what a housing authority needs in terms of documents before those referrals were made. That's all packaged up. That is provided to the housing authority. When the vouchers are awarded, there is a method to get those families housed very quickly, and we can help you set that up. Just a little bit about the roles. In the interest of time, I will just say the following. Families have a role to play here. Families have a role to play. And in fact, the more on the ground work that families do pounding the pavement to help look for housing, the better. But they also have to help you get their documents and things like that. So this is what Head Start does. You help parents learn to run a household. So families have a role to play here. The Head Start ECHO professional is out there, they're already looking for homeless families. You guys are aggressively recruiting homeless families. They would be figuring out if that family was the right referral. Then the ECHO team, whether that be in Elena's shop or wherever you would choose to house this, those are the folks that would be working alongside your staff, making sure that families get housed. What we like to do with the public housing authorities in this last category, your Department of Housing, your local public housing authorities, is make sure that we're making the best use of their time. Okay, they are going to be approving Section 8, yay or nay, and they're going to be awarding vouchers. We would like them to be kind of reverting back to that role to make it least burdensome on them. They do inspect units, however, for housing quality. This is a map of our beloved Connecticut. Okay, so they're going to be able to have statewide coverage as they expand their program. But I would argue that in your state, you might want to do the same thing. You might want to look at where are all of our Head Start agencies, and then begin to split your state sort of regionally, if that's possible. Find the most ready to go Head Starts in each region of your state and kind of deputize them to be the lead for that region. So again, that's probably fodder for another webinar, but I think these are important considerations. And sadly, there's going to be higher instances of homelessness and housing instability in some parts of your state than in others. So that'd be another way that you might want to select a Head Start and arm them with what they need. But I also want to emphasize, we at my organization, we're very passionate about not leaving people out because they're the only person in a far-flung part of the state that is suffering, right? So there's a way, again, to deploy this expertise out to a community to serve that one family that is struggling in their community. And I think our organization's been doing a pretty good job of that. Elena, no pressure. Okay, but I mean, having looked at this for about the last year, and again, it's been all running on the ground now for really not that long to have already housed 20 families, Elena. I'd say 3 months we've kind of been up and running. If you choose to do this in your state, we think that you'd probably want to relieve some of the burden of running it off of your statewide collaborative director. I cannot believe that Elena took this on willingly. It's amazing. You'll not only get a promotion, you'll be sainted after all this is said and done. But anyway, I think that whether it's ERA money or whatever, if it's collaborative money or Head Start money or something, HHS is probably going to have to consider adding funding into the statewide collaborative offices to run the early childhood housing outreach. That would be my guess. Or there could be somebody that worked in tandem with Elena that was under the Office of Early Childhood, because as I said, this probably needs to expand beyond Head Start and actually McKinney-Vento folks. So maybe this would be lateral and it would be somebody that could complement Elena's superb work. So, but also for your state, depending on the size, you probably do want some ready to go ECHO leads or coordinators embedded in the really high performing or larger Head Start operations like Mikhail has. If you are interested, first of all, again, if you're doing a great job and you just want to talk to me about how great it is and I can learn from you, please call me, right? And we'd love to profile your great work on our website and to share it with the world. If you have questions about how to do this in your state and you'd be interested in setting up a similar approach to what Connecticut has done, you could also feel free reaching out to the National Center. I'm very excited because I know this is pretty soon. Every state will have a Head Start on housing. I just know. It'll be thanks to Bob Beeson, I think, at the end of the day. So, all right. So with that, I think
we do have one question in chat right now, and that is, what percentage of early Head Start and Head Start enrolled families identify as homeless in Connecticut?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we range anywhere between usually 5 to 7% of our total families are categorized as experiencing homelessness from our Head Start population. And we grab that from the PIR data on a yearly basis. So that equates to anywhere between like 200 to 300 families.
Thank you for that, Elena. Are there any other questions for Ruthie, Elena, or for Mikhail before our closing remarks today? And you can drop those in chat if you want to. Okay, well, I just have, if there are questions, feel free to put them in chat during the closing remarks and we can get to them as well. I just wanted really just a couple of comments, not really questions, as I was listening to the presentation today. A couple of things that stood out to me. One was partnerships, right? That none of this is going to happen without partnerships. And anytime I think about partnerships with Head Start, Early Head Start, I think about how the families and the children are all of our families in a community. So if I'm in a community, the children at Head Start are also the children at the primary care provider or the dentist office. They're all our children and they're living in our houses. And so we can work smarter by working together. And that oftentimes in a community, that Head Start, Early Head Start is the connector. It's just kind of like in our blood to just connect with resources. And then whenever you were mentioning paperwork, I think about, and didn't really talk about it here, and maybe this is going to lead to a question, but like data sharing and how many documents that families have to fill out. For Head Start also, you know, we love our documents and monitoring. And if there's a way to do data sharing where we are collecting it at the front end, and so it's all ready to go. It's sort of like when you enroll at Head Start, you enroll in all of the social services that you're eligible for. And so I'd be curious your sort of thoughts on that, if there is discussion on data sharing with the housing department.
I'm going to jump in and I might kick that over to Mikhail, partly because another thing that we suspected going in was that because these are means tested programs, that folks, their income was already being vetted and determined by the Head Start folks, that we thought kind of what you said, Christina, which is like, why couldn't you just also do the determination for Section 8? So before I hand it over to Mikhail, I'm going to say, we went into this not wanting to add any additional paperwork burden to the Head Start staff. Okay, so we have a little form that is very straightforward, and it's one page. I love that it's one page. And we call it a prioritization form, but it's really more of a conversation. But it's like, basically, is the family interested, document ready, would this benefit the kids' learning, kind of a thing. But in my first conversation with Mikhail, she said that this is something that their folks, the Head Start workers, are already doing in terms of like determining income and then other benefits. So Mikhail, can you say a few words about that?
Sure. So most of the paperwork, if not all of it, was being collected as part of the enrollment process. And interestingly enough, also, that's a great time to, when you find out about families' housing situations. And so those families had also been flagged as giving resources and supporting them with our housing connections. And so this was great for us to easily identify those families because we were already trying to support them with their needs around experiencing homelessness.
And I'll just add that we really benefited from our Department of Housing's work on already creating a system to receive those documents via email, uploaded online. And so it's an automatic, sharing with obviously permission and approval of the families to do so. But that's a direct link to the Housing Authority. There's direct communication. There's a platform in which that communication happens back to the Head Start programs from the Housing Authority. So it's a direct connect there, we just have to thank our Department of Housing because they had that set up already.
That's great. Utilizing the resources that are already there, right? Yeah.
Right. I just, Christina, I just want to say that this is why it matters to just get out and talk to people, or even Zoom, but really get out and meet your housing people, all of them, because we were saying in the middle of a conversation, and the coordinated access network in your community might be called community continuum of care or something like that. Anyway, the homeless services folks, we were all kind of saying, wouldn't it be great if there was some automated way to provide these documents to the Housing Authority? And the coordinated entry folks were like, oh yeah, we have that. It's called Smartsheet. No problem. You can use it. So, I mean, of course, it requires some administrative protections, right? You can't just start freely sharing that. But I'm glad you mentioned that. I bet if folks on this call were to talk to their core continuum of care folks, they would find a similar platform exists in their community.
Yeah, and a shared agreement, I'm not going to say it's just so easy to put it together, a shared agreement, but a shared agreement to use it and to protect the privacy and all of those things. The other thing, and you just talked about it here too, is the connections. Is whenever you were talking about champions, you mentioned that in a couple of different ways. One is finding the Head Starts that were ready to go, the champions of the Head Start, the champions in the organization themselves to be the ECHO staff. And so that really stood out to me too. In this bold leadership series that we are doing, is that you can find bold leaders in a lot of different places. And that this fits in so nicely with what we're trying to do with bold leadership, is that it's going to take a bold leader to say that we're going to do this. We're going to go start this relationship. We're going to start talking to people. And bold leaders within your Head Starts to be the ECHO staff and to sit in the meetings and to learn more. Whenever I was hearing champions or these different people you were talking about, I just kept hearing bold leaders. These are bold leaders that you are talking about, and all of these positions and roles that you were talking about. Even parent has to be bold to say that I want to do this, and I want to find the birth certificate that I haven't really had to think about in a while, and get all my documents together. And then finally, I just wanted to share a little bit of a personal story about myself. As I'm a Head Start alum who my whole family, we lived in public housing growing up my whole life. So I know the benefits of, if you have someplace safe to be And then whenever you go to school, you can feel safe there. And the impact that had on my mom, so she wouldn't have to worry about finding houses or sort of couch surfing and all of those things, and having a safe place with Head Start sort of supporting us throughout that. So I just wanted to share that as another little story of a success story of what this housing connection with Head Start can do. So thank you all today for your wonderful presentation. And then to the attendees on the call today, if this is your first or your fourth part of being here on the webinar series, we want to thank all of you, and we want to challenge you to go out and be bold leaders as well, and also stay connected with the presenters that you've heard over these last couple of weeks. Is like what Ruthie said, and she said multiple times, so don't worry about reaching out to her, is reach out to these connections. That's where these webinars are so important too, is that you're meeting people who are already bold leaders and that you can make these connections with and bring it back into your communities. So in my parting words, I just challenge and inspire all of you to be bold leaders, and to our presenters today to continue your bold leadership. And thank you everyone for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having us.